Hi, I'm Rain Phoenix of LaunchLeft. You're watching our Saturday series, We the People, an intentional conversation about politics, activism, and our shared humanity. It's a place for artists and activists to learn more about political candidates, nonprofit organizations, and activists to discuss the many issues facing our world. Today's special guests are Hart Phoenix, co-founder and board president and mom of RPCP, Jeffrey Weisberg, co-founder and executive director of River Phoenix Center for Peacebuilding, and sociologist and board member MICAH Johnson. And they will be joined by writer-director Katie Davison and myself.
You know, what comes to my mind first really is about what are the questions that we're asking ourselves and each other. And, you know, we as an organization are having to retool and to offer some of our programs online now. And so we offered a number of them recently, and one of them was a sharing circle for people just to be able to speak to their experience, their concerns, their fears. And I asked a question. I said, what would ideal support look like for you? And everybody was like taken aback, and one woman started crying, and she's like, oh my God, that is such a deep question. I've never been asked that question. And I think in order for us to kind of cope with some of this reality, we have to have input and supportive ideas and mechanisms for us to make meaning out of these situations. And what is it that would support each of us to not only kind of endure, but how do we in fact thrive through this time and challenge?
Could we just take a step back and first talk a little bit about what RPCP does in the world, and just for people maybe who don't know?
I think it started, you know, my activism, my deep, you know, desire for a different world than I was being brought up in was when I was aware of that liberty and justice for all that was at the end of the Pledge of Allegiance when I was like a kid. And I knew viscerally that that wasn't happening. I could see it all around me. I lived in a neighborhood that was Latino, Jewish, and African-American people. And I just kind of dropped it. But as I grew up and started to see the disproportionate way that we lived and what was put on that, it was just very painful. And I really didn't know how to navigate it. And then I, you know, changed my life and had children and just kind of, you know, live day to day doing our best to impart the sense of fairness and equity and equality for all beings in our children. And then eventually meeting up with Jeffrey and doing work within the national arena in terms of offering programs and workshops on gender equality and social emotional learning and things like that. We came together and decided that we wanted to start an organization that would be a catalyst in helping flip the way that we react to conflict, misunderstanding, arguments, and how we can start to humanize one another and see what is below the waterline. What is it that affects those reactions that oftentimes lead to really, really great problems in this world, like we have from small family things all the way to war. What do we want, and what aren't we getting, and how can we do it in a more healthy way? And I think that is how and why we started the River Phoenix Center for Peacebuilding, looking for practical peace building skills and then offering them to the world, and that's where we're at.
For those listeners and watchers, why did you call it River Phoenix Center for Peacebuilding? How did River play into that in any way?
Well, it was an incredible inspiration. River was like the first solutionary that I ever met. He wasn't interested in what was wrong with everyone or why they did what they did. He went to prisons and sang with his little guitar, you know, at 5 years old in Latin America. He was more concerned with what are we going to do about it? And he wasn't interested in just calling out the problem, but just really being a solutionary. So that seemed like a really smart way of doing it. We're all kvetching about what's wrong with the world, but what are we willing to do about it? What are we willing to sacrifice? What are we willing to educate ourselves about? And how do we do it without having these, these sense of preferences rather than this kind of equal area?
You know what I've been noticing just in myself recently? I always thought that I was someone who could handle, a lot, like crisis. I just would run into it. And in this particular moment, it's felt really a lot like grief to me or something. It felt almost like my life changed in an instant, and now there's a lot of unknown, and I can't imagine things being the same again. And so I'm just wondering, like, what are you finding that people are dealing with, and what are the methodologies that you're offering people to help them cope?
I think we're all united in anxiety and humility at this time. I mean, this is a situation where your social status, your prestige, your privileges, it can't really save you, and it can't give you that sense of security that it once did. So I think everyone is a little more connected and acquainted with insecurities that people live with every day. Of course, those insecurities and those risks, they aren't equally distributed. But I do see a tremendous amount of anxiety. My research, my work in general focuses on underserved populations. It's a tremendous amount of risk. Among those folks, a tremendous amount of uncertainty. Folks have called it an epidemic within an epidemic. And it's harmful. But beyond those communities, I mean, I have students at the college level who are experiencing hurt like they've never experienced before, coupled with the anxiety of trying to find themselves, trying to make it, find a place in the world and fulfill their academic and professional ambitions. I mean, their lives have been interrupted in a real way. Some of them for the first time. They've experienced loss, they've experienced uncertainty, they've experienced a complete disruption. There are many students who are trapped on campus. There are some students who are trapped in households that may not be comfortable. So, and not only that, I hear from my students that they're experiencing loss. So it's very real. So the pain is real at multiple levels. In times like this is when heroes clock in. This is when the good people do their work. This is when brilliant ideas emerge. This is when kind hearts come to life. When times of catastrophe and uncertainty, this is when you learn who you are. And I try to help them because a lot of the students that I have are future behavioral health professionals. And I tell them, this is your work. This is the work. You might as well consider it an internship. And remember perspective. Perspective is everything in times of uncertainty. Panic and perspective. I have a bit of a pulse, even though I'm in social isolation, so there's only so much I can actually witness firsthand. But I do have a pulse on certain underprivileged communities and students.
I mean, one of the things that I think that is really helpful for me in the midst of this, and believe me, I have gone through days, at least a day, of deep grief, like will I ever see my children again? Will I ever, the me part of me is just the reality that we really don't know, and we don't want it to go back to normal, because normal was not right. It was the way we were all living, was not fair and was not right and was not living up to our highest potential as humans. But I think what really grounds me is remembering that it's not all ours to do, that we do our part. As you said, we become the heroes that we're meant to be, but we also trust that there is a universal knowing and yearning and deep spiritual something that made all of this to begin with. And we have no control over whether it rains. We have no control over just about anything. So the idea that we had control before is not really true. This is just an eye-opener, and it's an equalizer, and it is really powerful. And hopefully, out of that, we will not be able to go back to the way it was. And I just trust that the way that we do come back is going to be much better, because the spotlight is now on some of the things we've just discussed, which needed to be addressed.
Are you finding that people are feeling, when you're talking to students, are you finding that they're feeling isolated in the emotions that they're experiencing now. And if that is the case, what are some techniques? Like, is there something, I think I read that you were using some restorative justice techniques for families to work together. And could we talk a little bit about that? And then maybe what would be techniques that we could offer to people who are alone in this time?
We have been offering a number of different kind of trainings or little webinars for people to kind of look through a new lens of how they're managing relationship. And so one of those ideas that we did last night, we had a webinar with about 50 people called Conflict Coaching, which had to do with understanding the lens through which we see the world and relationships. And that a lot of people, when you think about conflict, would have words associated like with anger or fear or war or destruction or problem. And yet conflict holds within it vital messages and opportunities for change. And so if we can put on our new glasses, if you will, a new lens, a perspective of this problem orientation versus an outcome orientation, what is it that we want more of? How do we create that? And a lot of people are really stuck in patterns. And it's exaggerated by being in this isolation and being in kind of small rooms and houses. And so our encouragement really is to reach out in other ways, online, virtually, through the phone, somehow stay in contact, because what we see is that unless they have kind of nutrients that come in to support their growth and development, that people are actually going to get deeper into despair or isolation and depression and an overall feeling of not well. And so it's looking at what do I want and how can I, what are the resources that are available to me? And while a lot of that is limited, I think if people enter kind of an inquiry of what do I want around artistic and relational and spiritual and physical, emotional, that's kind of a pathway to building themselves and nurturing themselves.
Indirectly, I mean, some of the principles that we have embraced are life principles. So I try to use these tools as much as possible without trying to play the role of a therapist to my students. But I think my role has been more of a providing resources, disseminating information, and trying to equip them to manage in these uncertain times. Folks need more than ever tools to deal with conflict now that they're socially isolated, with family members, with folks who may have had tension before COVID. And as stress and uncertainties pile up, conflict could balloon. So folks need the tools. So what we've been trying to do at my university, in my department, and among other organizations, we've been trying to get those tools in the hands of the folks that need them, particularly these at-risk populations. And at this college level with the students, we've just been trying to get them to make those same connections virtually. It's really heartfelt. One of my students contacted me. Her grandparents, she was tremendously close with her grandparents, and both of them are sick. She can't see them, and she's like, Dr. Johnson, should I just drop out? What do I do with this? I mean, school is not important to me right now. My family is important, and the love of my grandparents is important. So, what do you do? How do you tell someone that's dealing with that unthinkable amount of tragedy and every day, not being able to sleep at night? So what we do is we try to, give them tools. There's resources. There are folks providing the same sort of behavioral health and mental health tools and therapies. They can provide those virtually. And they can give motivation, they can give inspiration to folks that need it. So we've equipped these students as best as we can. And the next step of the work is a little bit more complicated, is to equip those underserved populations and communities. There's certain folks who live in digital deserts. Social isolation without electricity or internet access is really difficult. And of course, we've had power outages because everyone's home. Of course, rural areas are prone to power outages. Hopefully, companies have been being lenient on underserved populations, but if folks had trouble paying the electric bill before COVID, they're definitely going to have trouble paying the electric bill now. So that's the new charge, right? So that's what keeps me excited and inspired. It's like, how can we figure out this next wave of it? How can we reach rural populations, frontier populations? How can we reach low-income populations, minority populations that were already isolated and marginalized, and they may not be having the basic resources. They don't have a car to go to drive-through testing. They don't have Wi-Fi access to, I know there's no Wi-Fi access in certain rural areas from firsthand experience, but how do we somehow give them services and tools that they need to maintain their behavioral health and their mental health as they go through this tough period?
One of the miracles of the moment right now is this internet and the Zoom. I mean, we've talked to probably hundreds of people over the past 2 weeks, several hundred during some of the trainings that we give, whether it's parents with children, or it's just people that, like tell us what's on your heart circles, or what Jeffrey was talking about. And we have a bunch of things coming up because we're just now developing it, taking it from in-person, relational, caring, hugging, that kind of nurturing, and developing it so that we can do that online. And it is pretty amazing that you can sit and look at 25 people on this screen right now and have everyone's name, have them introduce themselves, and somehow there is a way that they almost feel more apt to speak, more apt to share, more apt to be present than they would be in an in-person circle that quickly. So, a lot that we talk about with families is this kind of, just within families, whatever they are, is that, using restorative practices, like how do you equalize the playing field? How do you create norms in this house now that you're all together? Is it the parents say, this is what you do and make a list, or do you create it together? So these are things, how do you create morning circles? This is our day, let's make a schedule together. So when people feel like they have a voice, whether it's an adult or a child, and they're not being put in a position of, you follow this, which is always the fight, it's like, I got better things to do. It changes the whole energy and attitude. Everyone's empowered, everybody knows, and being honest. Some of these parents are just like, what do I tell my children? To be honest. I mean, you don't have to play it up, but you can certainly say there is a sickness going around, and you're safe. We are in here to keep each other safe. Or, so there's just some simple, I was saying practical before. Some of the communication skills are so practical. It's just that we don't take the time to use it. We're so used to just kind of setting the stage, blaming people when something goes wrong, punishing. And we just want to, kind of share that lens of inquiry about behavior.
I mean, hearing what MICAH said with these, families in rural areas who don't even have Wi-Fi or access to anyone helping them with tools, even just making these people aware, like, we have this option to be a kinder, more understanding family.
In our work at the River Phoenix Center for Peacebuilding, right, it's an overarching intent and set of practices, this field of peacebuilding. And obviously, there are basic needs that have to be addressed, right? If people don't have some of those basic needs met, you can imagine and understand why there is violence. And so we've been looking at and been practicing over these years, some core strategies, but we're looking at how do we translate this model into local communities, neighborhoods. And so what we've developed is our community justice model that has to do with various levels of training and empowerment and personal growth for directly impacted residents to be able to kind of create and cause the change that they want to see in their communities and in the world. And so we have a project where we are working with people who are on probation, adults who have gotten out of prison or are on parole. And this is a 6-week training for them, 10 hours a week, to learn different aspects of community organizing, legal empowerment, social emotional learning, conflict resolution, restorative justice, and then to take those skills and actually create a project within their neighborhoods that then begins to hopefully take root and grow. And you know, what we have to address is like internet access and computers and things like that, because this quarantine or isolation, if you will, is going to last for a while longer. And we're starting this in June, May and June actually. And so, but it is an exciting pilot to see these people who don't necessarily have a job and who have just gotten released from prison, because a lot of them are getting early release, and those who want to learn this skill set to become change makers in their own communities and their own families. I can't say enough about how fortunate we are to have MICAH as a board member and a champion. He comes to our 9-day immersions and offers an incredible training on the historical context of racism and slavery and the disproportionality that exists in communities. And so his expertise and perspective of the trauma of growing up Black and poor in America helps to our activists and the people who are working on changing communities to have this lens and perspective. Because particularly for me as a white man and a white person, you know, I don't have that same experience. And so having the understanding in the work that we're trying to do to make a difference, being informed by why this exists even today, 300 plus 400 years later, it's still very much alive, and these inequities, and it must be understood and practiced, and forming these relationships for us to create some of these changes in systems and communities. So thank you, MICAH, for all your incredible support and championing and leadership.
I'm just blessed and humbled to be in company of such great people, and RPCP is the real deal, and they respond very well, very much community empowering organization, and that's just an honor to be a part of that, and to be a part of such an amazing network of human beings, and to wear that name of an amazing human being is just incredible.
I mean, I've been really curious. I've gotten really interested in like the social and political and historical effects that pandemics of the past have had on cultures. And so I've been reading like Camus' The Plague, you know, and a couple other, like a lot of literature about the bubonic plagues in the 1300s and the 1700s. And I found both that it was like disconcerting to me how consistent human nature is. Do you know what I mean? Across the board, but also that these historical moments of epidemic crises often create a moment in which people who are marginalized can be seen, where we recognize what is essential to each other and our relationships to one another and to run society as a whole. So I guess I'm just wondering, like MICAH as a sociologist, like, do you see a moment for transformative change here? Are you feeling that people are becoming more aware of some of the, you know, discrepancies in the way that people have access to resources? And are you finding that the awareness has been, you know, has gone up across the board? Like, are you hopeful, basically?
So I see people having a lack of perspective. And we're all suffering on some degree, but there are some people who are struggling. There are some people who have lost multiple family members. That's a different level of pain than someone who's afraid to lose family members. So I think I think we can get there though, because there are folks who are exercising their voice and bringing awareness to these issues. But if you're talking about the intersection between history and marginalized groups and catastrophes, out of this, there will be, the disparities will be incredible, and we won't really know the numbers yet. I couldn't sleep. I stayed up for 2 days when I was just thinking about particularly the African-American community and the way Blacks and Latinos in particular were being displayed in the media, and the numbers that we don't even know are there, but some of the numbers that are coming out are alarming. These are communities that were already devastated in multiple levels. And some of the data indicates that there are some really, really alarming disparities with COVID fatality. And these are deserts. These communities are food deserts. These communities are resource deserts. So how do we survive that? How do we think about those communities? How are we thinking about those communities? See, Trump said something that was, people laughed at him and teased him, but it was, I don't know if he means to tell people what's going to happen, but he said, if you have clout and resources, you're going to be fine. He said that a month ago, and it's so true that folks who have clout and resources will probably be okay, but there are communities who, I've researched the disparity, and I won't be gregarious, but I researched the disparity with COVID, and it's heartbreaking. And there's data and anecdotal evidence that shows that if there is one test and there's two people, one white, one black, that black person is going to have to go home and wait it out and have to figure out the white person will get the test. If there's one ventilator, if there's one bed, that black person will go home. There's been anecdotes and data of health professionals who are black who've been turned away. And there's several anecdotes of folks who were turned away, were told they had a flu or told they were not meeting some criteria for a COVID test, and they went home and they passed away. And there's no one going door to door collecting data on this right now. And the data that does exist, folks aren't disclosing it because it would be a political nightmare. So to be solution-based, I think data harmonization is essential. There's some legislation right now to compel the federal government to report this data. Let us know daily the fatality disparities. With that information, at least we can act. At least we can be able to catch it before these communities are devastated completely. On a historical piece, we've seen the way disease has impacted vulnerable groups in this country. And there are some groups that did not survive, not just in this country, around the world. There are vulnerable populations around the world that have been decimated because of these sorts of outbreaks. And we just can't let history repeat itself. So we need to humanize, we need data harmonization. We also need to humanize. Some of the language and some of the narratives surrounding minorities is just flat out wrong, but it's ancient. It's an ancient form of racism that kind of keeps people thinking the way they're going to think so that they can continue to preserve themselves and not have to worry about their neighbors. But again, there are folks who are blowing whistles. There are folks who are raising their voices. There are folks fighting, some folks fighting in Congress to do what they can to see change. So I'm excited about those things.
This pandemic obviously has a different weight to it because if you get the virus, you clearly could die. But at the same time, I'm hoping as we come back into a new world, that people are asking that question, like, what am I willing to give up in my privilege to honor the life of all people, but particularly for those who have so much less and have been marginalized. But without that willingness to even ponder that question, I think that kind of change is going to be very, very difficult. But having that awareness and information and knowledge needs to be matched with a certain willingness to do something with it.
I don't know. I think that even when the truth is hard, it's better to know the truth. You know what I mean? I like to see it and, and fearlessly, like, be able to take it on. Like you said, try to be heroes. It's our opportunity to be heroes. I find that really inspiring.
Yeah. And I love that, like you were also saying, Micah, which is so helpful, is that there are people, there are groups, there are agencies that are getting the internet into homes that never had it before, donating hundreds and hundreds of thousands of computers. And so when we come out of this, if we come out of it in a way that, you know, any of us are able to use our computers or whatever, people that never had it before have it now. And that voice will be heard in a way that it won't be hidden. I have so much faith that that's going to happen, that they're being equipped for this moment. But that level of having tools like that will make the world a lot smaller and much easier to understand and connect. So that is my hope.
Thank you guys for doing this and getting
Yeah.
important messages and deepening the conversation.
This is the time. We're all at home. Why not try to tease apart all this stuff and actually find solutions together? Well, thank you for being on the show. Thank you, Katie Davison, Micah Johnson, Jeffrey Weisberg, Hart Phoenix, and all you watchers and listeners of LaunchLeft, We the People. We'll see you next Saturday.